for someone to sustain a herniated disc given the mechanism of injury as described by Mr. Cash?
I believe that it is.
Okay. How so?
Well, if we refer to our skeleton here to show an example, at this level you see the 9.5 S1 disc level. And in Mr. Cash's case, he's already having some degenerative problems. So the space in between the vertebrae, where the disc is starting to narrow. And as he was oriented, holding the pipe with the conveyor on his left, as the pipe kicked back, it caused a twisting motion and torsion, causing the spine to move this way, and that's consistent with the right-sided focal disc herniation and the radicular symptoms into the right leg.
Doctor, do you have an opinion whether the surgery that you performed was reasonable, necessary, and causally related to his work injury?
Yes, I do, and I believe that it was.
Do you have Mr. Cash on any restrictions right now?
Yes, Mr. Cash is currently restricted from all work as he recovers from his surgery. I've also prescribed a course of physical therapy and work hardening to hopefully get him back into a work environment soon.
Okay. Dr. Wright, I'm going to show you a report that we have. Can you verify that you authored this report that on my request?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to attach this as Deposition Exhibit 1. Any objection to that?
No objection.
Thank you. Doctor, have all your opinions rendered today been within a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
They have.
I have nothing further.
Doctor, my name is Harry Lafferty. I represent Pennsylvania Tube and its insurance carrier in this workers' compensation litigation. If I understand your direct testimony correctly, it appears it's your opinion that Mr. Cash's problems are emanating from two things, one being stenosis and degenerative disc disease, and the other being a herniated disc. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Doctor, you would agree with me that both stenosis and degenerative disc disease are conditions that develop throughout an individual's lifetime and not something that develops as a result of an acute injury, correct?
I would agree that they are gradual processes that develop over time, but certainly if there is a traumatic acute injury, that those conditions can be aggravated.
And further, doctor, you would agree with me that a herniated disc is something that can occur spontaneously and without any inciting traumatic event, correct?
I agree that that's true, but again, if there is an inciting event, twisting injury, dealing with the pipe, for instance, this is certainly something that can occur.
And you did review the MRI that was taken shortly after Mr. Cash's alleged incident at work.
Yes, I reviewed those films.
And as I understand it, that your review of those films is part of the basis for reaching your diagnosis of Mr. Cash's condition, correct?
That's correct.
But when you review those films, you can't actually tell when the conditions that were depicted on the films occurred, right?
That's certainly true, but given Mr. Cash's complaints of symptoms to me, it seems unlikely that given the herniation that's represented on that MRI, that he would have been able to continue performing any type of work subsequent to that type of herniation.
So what you're saying is that you're relying on Mr. Cash's history of when his symptoms developed to reach your diagnosis and your opinion about the causation of his problems, correct?
That's correct to the extent that Mr. Cash explained to me his extreme low back pain symptoms and radicular symptoms into his right leg. It's not based entirely on his statements to me that he never had any back complaints before, because he informed me of that previously.
All right. Well, if it turned out that Mr. Cash's previous history is different than what he related to you, it's fair to say that your opinion about causation would change, right?
It's certainly a possibility.
Doctor, I'm going to show you a chiropractic record from Mr. Cash's treating chiropractor. Take a look at this, if you will, please.
Sure.
You would agree that that indicates that Mr. Cash was seeking treatment for low back pain less than 2 weeks before this alleged occurrence, correct?
Yes, I agree that that's true. Like I stated previously, Mr. Cash informed me of his prior chiropractic treatment.
Well, this would indicate to you that he was having problems in his low back just shortly before this alleged incident at work, right?
Yes, I agree. Like I stated before, Mr. Cash informed me that he sought chiropractic treatment, which is a lifestyle choice. And I would note on this October 3rd, 2010 record that there's no indication of the radicular pain into the right leg or the noted severity of the low back complaints.
Very well, doctor. I'm going to mark this exhibit, deposition exhibit 2, and have that attached by the court reporter.
Fine.
I don't have any further questions, doctor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.
I'll waive signature.
Hello, doctor. My name is Harry Lafferty. I represent Pennsylvania Tube and its insurance carrier in workers' compensation litigation initiated by Jonathan Cash. Before we get started, could you please state your name for the record?
Julia Black, MD.
And I'd like to ask you some questions about your qualifications. What is your educational background?
I have a medical degree from the University of Guatemala. After that, I did an internship and residency at the University Hospital in Pittsburgh. In 1986, I began a private practice in neurosurgery in Pittsburgh. I am also board certified in neurosurgery, and I serve as a full professor of neurosurgery at the University Hospital Medical School. I have also published approximately 300 medical journal articles on neurosurgery and 3 textbooks.
That's impressive, doctor. Could you please estimate what percentage of your treatment involves the treatment of low back complaints?
My practice includes approximately 50% spinal surgery and 50% brain surgery.
Could you also estimate what percentage of your practice involves medical legal work, such as IME examinations?
About 5%.
Now, doctor, at the request of my office, did you perform an evaluation on Mr. Cash with regard to this litigation?
I did.
And at the time of that examination, did you obtain an oral history from Mr. Cash about what he claims happened to him?
Yes, Mr. Cash told me that he was in the course of his employment and he was jarred by a conveyor belt. And after that happened, he felt pain in his lower back and going down his right leg.
Did you also perform a physical examination on Mr. Cash?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result of that examination?
Mr. Cash's complaints were inconsistent and did not conform to what you would expect anatomically.
Could you go into a little bit greater detail about what you mean by his complaints were inconsistent?
Yes. For example, Mr. Cash, when asked to raise his leg up off the table, complained of severe pain. But when he had that same leg in a down position as he was sitting on the table, and I asked him to move that same leg, he had no complaints of pain.
Okay, doctor. Did you also, in conjunction with your examination, review various medical records that were provided by my office?
Yes.
And were there any records of significance that you reviewed?
I reviewed his medical records and the records of Dr. Wright, and also records of treatment with a chiropractor prior to this incident, at which time he complained of pain in his back.
Did you review diagnostic films, including an MRI examination that was taken of Mr. Cash shortly after this alleged incident?
Yes, I reviewed the actual films.
Okay. Based on your review of those films and your review of the records that were provided and your physical examination and the history provided to you by Mr. Cash, were you able to reach an opinion as to what the source of his present complaints is?
Yes.
And what is your opinion?
It is my opinion, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that Mr. Cash suffers from degenerative disc disease and a decrease in the water content of his discs and also arthritis. And I can demonstrate on the model of the spine that we have here that actually Mr. Cash has deterioration of his discs throughout his spine. And this would be the cause of his lower back pain and pain going down his right leg.
That diagnosis that you just described, is that a diagnosis that's related to the work injury that Mr. Cash is claiming to have sustained?
No, there was insufficient force. The problems that Mr. Cash has are related to the aging process.
Thank you, doctor. Those are all the questions that I have. Ms. Bailey is going to review your file, and then she'll have some questions for you as well.
Hello, doctor. How are you doing today?
Very well. Good morning.
Good morning. As you know, my name is Justine Bailey, and I represent Jonathan Cash. Doctor, in the records that you reviewed that predate the date of this injury, you'd agree that nowhere does it indicate that Mr. Cash had right leg complaints.
Yes.
And doctor, you would also agree with me that a trauma can aggravate a pre-existing degenerative condition.
I agree with that, except that in this case, there was insufficient force to cause that condition.
And that's your understanding of what that force is.
Yes.
Doctor, in the records that you reviewed, would you also agree with me that nowhere does any other provider indicate or suspect that Mr. Cash is engaging in symptom magnification?
I agree that that does not occur in the medical records, but I found that Mr. Cash's complaints were inconsistent.
Doctor, you agree that pain is subjective, correct?
Yes.
Now, before this deposition started, as I was waiting for you out in the waiting room, I took a look on your side table and you have a whole bunch of pamphlets there. And I saw this pamphlet that you, I assume, put out for your patients, where it indicates that an individual can sustain a trauma to their low back with forceful twisting. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. However, based on my review of all the documents in this case, there is no objective proof that Mr. Cash had the force necessary to cause that type of injury. The mechanism of injury is just not sufficient in this case.
Doctor, you've only examined Mr. Cash on one occasion, correct?
That's correct.
And that was December 20th, 2011?
Yes.
And before this deposition started, I had a chance to review your file. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in that, I noticed a letter from Mr. Lafferty to you scheduling, asking you to evaluate Mr. Cash and enclosing all of his medical records. The letter also summarizes all of the medical records given to you. Did you actually read all of the medical records?
I did read most of Mr. Cash's medical records, but Mr. Lafferty knows that I am considered one of the top neurosurgeons in the country, and he was trying to save time for me, and so he provided me with a summary, which I did use.
So do you agree that if Mr. Lafferty's summary is inaccurate, That could cause you to change your opinions that you've rendered here today, correct?
It could, but I have no basis to conclude that Mr. Lafferty's summary was inaccurate.
On direct examination, you also indicated that about 5% of your practice involves legal work and IMEs.
Yes.
Okay. About how many IMEs do you do a week?
About 5 per week.
And another thing I noticed when I was reviewing your file was an invoice that you sent to Mr. Lafferty charging him $2,000 for your evaluation. Is that the standard charge for an IME?
That is, but that also includes the written report.
That includes your report, but doesn't include your testimony here today, does it?
That is correct.
And that's a separate charge that you will be billing Mr. Lafferty for.
Yes.
Okay. So you do about five evaluations a week at $2,000 an evaluation. That's $10,000 a week, doctor.
That is correct, although I do not do those exams every week of the year because I have 5 weeks of vacation and about 6 weeks of the year I spend traveling around the world presenting papers on my research.
That still leaves over 40 weeks left in a year. So, that's over $400,000, doctor, you make on legal evaluations. Good for you. I have nothing further.
I have no follow-up questions. Would you like to read or waive?
I will read.
Very
Is
well.
that an extra charge to Mr. Lafferty?
No. I have to be extremely accurate in everything that I do.
Good morning. This is a mediation in the case of Jonathan Cash versus Pennsylvania Tube. I reviewed the file and it's regarding an October 15, 2010 low back injury with surgical intervention. There's currently a claim petition pending before Judge Cigna, and we're here today to see if a settlement can be reached between the employer and the injured party. It may be beneficial to both parties to try to resolve this claim without going to a decision. For you, Mr. Cash, there's great risk involved in going to a settlement. You have about 2 years of benefits pending before the judge right now from the date of injury, and if you're successful, you'll obtain benefits at the rate of $845 a week for that time period, and also you'll receive all of your medical expense paid for. If the judge issues a negative decision, you'll get nothing. None of your bills will be paid for the medical expense, and you will be responsible for any co-pays, if any, that your private health insurance doesn't pay. Mr. Lafferty, representing Pennsylvania Tube, obviously you're aware of your liability. It looks like Mr. Cash is owed about $87,000 retroactive to the date of injury to this date, which is quite significant. So if the judge rules in Mr. Cash's favor, you have a pretty hefty amount that you're going to have to pay out front and obviously into the indeterminate future. So with that said, let's begin. Both parties know here today that whatever is said is confidential. Anything that we discuss won't be relayed back to Judge Cigna. It'll stay in this room. Attorney Lafferty, do you have your client available by phone?
I do, Judge. I also met with the adjuster earlier this week and have authority to negotiate on their behalf.
Well, I would assume that they would understand the liability up to this point, so we can look forward to that. Mr. Cash, before we start with the demand with your attorney, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Sure do, Judge. This whole thing has ruined my life. I mean, every week that I'm off work is another week where I'm losing money. With this constant pain I have, I'm not sure that I'm ever going to even be able to work like I did before. And I've always worked. I was hurt at work, and I don't understand why they're not paying me benefits. With this constant pain, I can't play guitar anymore. Quite frankly, Judge, I'm going down, down, down in a ring of fire.
I certainly understand your concerns, Mr. Cash. I'm sure this has had a major impact on not only you, but your family, and your whole future plans have been put on hold. Ms. Bailey, you've had an opportunity to speak with your client, and what have you come up with?
Well, first, Your Honor, I just want to say, Johnny, I understand that you've been through a lot with this injury, and it's been a very tough road for you and your family. And that pain and suffering is not to be overlooked. Unfortunately, in workers' compensation, you cannot recover for that type of experience that you have gone through. However, we have brought a third-party case against the company that manufactured that conveyor belt that caused your injury. And your pain and suffering will be a factor considered in that case.
That's good. I got a lot of pain.
Judge, before we go any further, I'd just like to say that it's our position that we stand a great likelihood of prevailing if we have Judge Signa render a decision. This was an unwitnessed injury. The claimant testified that he knew that there was a policy requiring him